In 1775, 9 months away from their own Declaration of Independence, U.S. troops marched into Montreal. Only Quebec City stood in the way of annexation. But on May 6, 1776, British ships arrived at Quebec and the Americans were defeated. This was not the first attempt to annex Canada by force, and it wouldn't be the last. What makes the invasion of 1775 noteworthy is that the Americans then tried something new, and it worked. Having failed through force, the Americans tried negotiating. By the Treaty of Paris of 1783, Canada lost forever all its territory between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, that is, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana. All of this territory was surrendered to an enemy which had been incapable of effecting the capture of a single one of them. Neither the Canadians nor the Indians who fought and died on behalf of Canada in the 1775 invasion were consulted. In 1844, Polk became U.S. President on the slogan 54, 40, or fight, claiming all the west coast of North America up to Alaska. Britain retreated all the way to the 49th parallel, and so the U.S. succeeded in acquiring, without a struggle, the harbor at Seattle, the entire Columbia Valley, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. This, however, was Britain's doing, not Canada's, and is one of the reasons why Canadians would soon form a nation of their own. The term negotiating had kind of a dismal ring to it. The phrase free trade sounded better. One of the earliest uses of the term was made in 1849 by Lord Elgin, then Governor-General of Canada, in relation to the devastation of the British repeal of the Corn Laws. Property in most of the Canadian towns, and more especially in the capital, has fallen 50% in value. 3/4 of the commercial men are bankrupt, owing to free trade. Another synonym for free trade, which also sounded good, was the word reciprocity. Through the 1854 Reciprocity Treaty, U.S. lumber companies and fisheries gained, while Canadians lost. Exports from Canada to the U.S. consisted almost entirely of raw materials. The U.S. repealed the treaty in 1866 due to the belief that doing so would force the Canadian colonies to beg for entry into the U.S. When Canada became a nation in 1867, it was a time of great celebration. But what did our American neighbors think? The U.S. House of Representatives unanimously passed the resolution of extreme solicitude, condemning the formation of Canada as a separate nation. In 1870, an opposition motion was put forward demanding free trade with the U.S. Given past experiences, one would think the newly formed nation would shy away from such demands. Indeed, Georges Etienne Cartier, a founder of Canadian Confederation, replied, "What will be the consequences of industrial reciprocity? The factories of Canada will lose the advantages they now possess, and eventually the largest manufacturing industries will be concentrated in the U.S. The end result would be union with the U.S., that is to say, our annihilation as a country." It appears, however, that Canadians don't learn their history lessons very well. 1891 was Canada's first free trade election. In 1887, the provinces, with the exception of New Brunswick, called for free trade with the U.S. Sir John A. Macdonald simply ignored them. Perhaps he had the right idea. A strong battle ensued and free trade was defeated.
When John A. Macdonald in 1891 gave his life literally in his last campaign of his life at 76, when he, in the last speech that he gave in his life, warned Canadians against what he called the veiled treason that would take from them their country, and he was talking about the liberal idea and concept of free trade.
1911 saw Canada's second free trade election, again defeated. This put an end to talk of free trade for more than 20 years. But, as the saying goes, if at first you don't succeed, try again, and this time with great success. In 1935, the Canada-US Reciprocal Trade Agreement resulted in the rapid increase of exports of Canadian raw materials, and imports of finished products from the U.S. grew, thereby increasing Canada's dependency on the U.S. market. Rather than using Canadian raw materials to build Canadian finished products for export, the agreement set in place the economic structure that allowed American capital to take over large parts of the Canadian economy and resources during the next 50 years. Which brings us to the 1988 and 1993 free trade agreements.
Here in Canada, it was John A. Macdonald and George Etienne Cartier who created the Conservative Party and then created a nation. At the time, it seemed like it would be impossible. The Canadian colonies had negotiated their first free trade arrangement with the United States in 1854. It ran from 1854 to 1866. And in 1866, the Americans unilaterally canceled that trade agreement because they felt that the Canadian colonies had become so dependent on the U.S. market that they would ask or beg for entry into the United States. And there were many in Washington that wanted to send the victorious northern armies straight north into Canada to erase the last vestiges of British influence on the continent. And in the face of that powerful move to see our colonies integrated in the United States, George Etienne Cartier and John A. Macdonald said, no, we're going to create a nation here. They sat down and led the Confederation movement, and then they flung a railway across the country to hold the new country together. The naysayers said it couldn't be done. How could a little country with just 4 million people build the world's longest railway? The Liberals called the idea of building an all-Canadian railway an example of the criminal absurdity of nationalism. Yet the fathers of the Conservative Party, Cartier and Macdonald, persevered, and they set the basis and the foundation for a proud and an independent country. They had a vision of Canada as a great nation that would stand on the world stage and be a competitor to all, and they never had any idea that Canada would one day end up selling off all of its, the bulk of its companies into foreign hands. And I'm wondering who has that kind of vision today in terms of our country and its role in the world. Our national government, the Liberals, came to power in 1993 promising to reassert Canada's independence. They were going to campaign. They campaigned against the free trade agreement and NAFTA. They campaigned against what they called Brian Mulroney's sellouts. They were going to reassert our independence as a nation. They were going to scrap the GST. They got into power and they reversed themselves on all of those. And they are now, they began abruptly praising the agreements they had just campaigned against, and now they're advocating deeper and deeper integration into our powerful neighbor to the south on all fronts. They're talking about removing the border in terms of the military, placing our military under more and more U.S. command, and that the next steps, we're told, for the North American Free Trade Zone should be for Canada to consider adopting the U.S. dollar as the common currency for the North American Free Trade Zone. If we do, it'll be the end of any kind of monetary or fiscal independence for our country, and this is not what I want for the future of Canada.